You won't believe what my own daughter told me after I lost everything. After decades of sacrifice, raising her alone, putting her needs before mine, and working day and night just to keep her safe, I found myself with nowhere left to go. I stood on her pristine front porch, suitcase in one hand and ashes in the other. The fire had taken everything, my home, my memories, my peace, all reduced to soot and silence. I had nothing left, except the faint hope that the daughter I gave everything to would open her arms, just once. But when she opened that tall, glossy black door framed like a magazine cover, she didn't ask why I was there. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't even glance at the soot clinging to my coat. She just looked me over like I was clutter, out of place in her perfect world. Then she said it, "You can't stay here, Mom. You ruin the aesthetic." The words hit harder than the fire. She didn't slam the door. She didn't have to. It closed softly, too softly, like the end of a chapter I hadn't realized I was in. I spent the night at the Oakview Inn, $28 a night. The room smelled like mildew and old carpet. But the silence? That was louder than anything. I stared at the cracked mirror and wondered when I'd become invisible, when love turned into shame. Emily was all I had. Her father left when she was 10. I gave up everything, marriage, dreams, even sleep, to raise her. I never brought another man home. I never missed a recital. I was there, every single time. She went to college, became a nutritionist, married a surgeon, moved to Charleston, and curated a life so clean and perfect there wasn't room for the woman who made it possible. That night in the motel, I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried at funerals, like I hadn't cried the day I lost my job. Quietly, because I still didn't want to burden anyone. The next morning, I wandered to a place I hadn't seen in years, Oakwood Terrace, the little two-bedroom house with the peeling paint and chain-link fence, where dandelions ruled the backyard and love was loud and messy and real. That's where I saw Velma, my childhood friend, shelling peas on her porch like time had stood still. "Maggie Walker," she laughed, jumping up like we were kids again. "You look like you've seen a ghost." We talked for hours about the years, the daughters, the heartbreak. Then she looked me in the eye and said, "You still got fight in you, Maggie. You just forgot how to throw a punch." That night, I didn't sleep. I opened the little black notebook I kept hidden in my purse, my secret savings, every penny I'd stitched and scraped together over the years. Stocks, sewing gigs, odd jobs no one ever noticed. It wasn't enough for revenge, but it was enough for something better. 2 weeks later, I found the house. Big white columns, wraparound porch, marsh views, the kind of place my daughter once dreamed of when she was little. She circled it in a magazine once and said, "One day, I'm going to live there." I bought it in cash. Then I took a photo of the front with the crisp white paint and the bold red "for sale" sign and sent it to her. No caption, just the picture. It took her less than 5 minutes to call. Her voice was tight. "Mom, why did you send me that house?" "Because I bought it," I said. She was silent. "It's yours," I added, "or it could be, but I'm thinking of selling it." Her voice trembled. "Why would you do that?" I took a breath, steady and calm, "Because, sweetheart, it fits your aesthetic." And before she could say a word, I hung up. For the first time in years, I smiled. I thought I was just buying a house, but what I didn't realize then, what I couldn't possibly have known, was that this wasn't just about walls and windows. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Something that could shatter us and maybe, just maybe, piece us back together. But first, secrets had to surface. And Emily, she wasn't the only one hiding something. She didn't call that night. I half expected a call, a message even. Maybe she'd shout, maybe she'd cry, maybe she'd laugh and tell me I was being too dramatic. But instead, silence. It settled in like a heavy fog in an old graveyard, quiet, cold, and full of things left unsaid. I spent another night at the Oakview Inn. The mattress felt harder than before. The vending machine outside my door buzzed louder, somehow. Everything was off-kilter, like the world was holding its breath. I wasn't in a rush. For the first time in a long time, I was the one in control. The next morning, I returned to the house I'd bought, the one on the hill, standing tall with a porch that whispered promises of quiet mornings and fresh coffee. A house with charm, mystery, and shadows of its own. I walked through it slowly. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, as if the past was waking up. The air smelled of lemon polish, but underneath that, something deeper, something old, a memory waiting to be uncovered. In the dining room, sunlight caught the crystal chandelier, scattering tiny rainbows across the walls. I imagined Emily there, glass in hand, performing the version of her life she let the world see. But then I heard the gravel crunch. I didn't move. A pause. Then the front door opened. She'd used the key I'd mailed, tucked inside a velvet pouch. "Mom?" Her voice was quiet, uncertain. I didn't answer. She found me in the sunroom, her heels clicking on the wooden floor like the ticking of a clock winding down. She looked tired, unpolished, real. "You really bought this place?" she asked, eyes scanning the room like it might vanish at any moment. I nodded. "Why?" I leaned back. "You said I ruined your aesthetic, so I found one that suited you better." Her face faltered just for a second. Then the mask returned. "This isn't funny. I'm not laughing. You sent me a picture of a house you knew I'd love, then put a for sale sign on it. I thought you liked signs." Her eyes narrowed. "Is this revenge?" "No," I said softly. "It's a mirror." Silence followed, not empty, heavy. Finally, she whispered, "You don't understand how things work now. My world, it's precise, structured. Everything fits. Everything looks right. You don't. You're unpredictable," she continued. "You say things out loud. You don't try to blend in." "I didn't raise you to blend in," I said. "I raised you to stand tall." She looked away. "Is that why you've been rewriting things?" I asked. Her head turned sharply. "What are you talking about?" "You told people your father left and never came back. But that's not the truth, is it?" Her mouth parted, but no words came. I opened a drawer and pulled out an old envelope, edges worn, ink fading. She hesitated, then took it with trembling fingers. Inside, a letter, her father's handwriting, dated 8 years after he left. He'd tried to return, begged for forgiveness, said he'd changed, visited, but was turned away. She read in silence. Then her knees gave out. She sank onto the couch. I told him to leave," she whispered. "I thought I was protecting you. I was 16. I sat beside her, my heart racing. "I was angry," I admitted. "He left you with everything. I wanted to blame him. But you erased him." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't think you'd forgive me." I took her hand. She flinched, but didn't let go. "There's more than one way to break a home," I said. "Sometimes it's not fire. Sometimes it's silence." We sat together, the weight of years pressing in. Then she said, "I don't deserve this house. That's not for me to decide. What if I wanted to earn it?" I looked toward the garden, wildflowers bursting through the cracks in the walkway. "Then we'd have to start again," I said. "It won't be easy." "I don't want easy," she said, voice breaking. "I want you back." Something in me softened, but another part, the one that remembered the cold porch light and the closed door, held its ground. "Then don't say it," I whispered. "Show it." She nodded, and just like that, the first crack appeared in the wall between us. But the house wasn't done with us yet. There was still one envelope left. I hadn't noticed it before. Yellowed, fragile, buried at the bottom of the box. A piece of paper that had waited decades for its moment. To tell the truth, to change everything, to break us again, only this time wide open. And I wasn't ready for what it would reveal. Maybe a small part of me wanted it to stay there, untouched, like a test, like a dare. That envelope had sat on my kitchen table for days, its silence louder than any scream. When I finally opened it, the moment stole the air from my lungs. The handwriting sharp, hurried, familiar. It was his. Daniel's. 30 years had passed, but I'd recognize his writing in the dark. Slanted strokes that always looked like he was on the verge of leaving, even when he wasn't. I could hear his voice in every scratched letter. And the date? Just 4 years ago. Not some relic from another lifetime, not a faded memory. This was recent, real. "Maggie, if this finds you, it means I finally found the nerve to try again. I don't deserve to ask for anything, but I've spent the last 10 years trying to make peace with the man I used to be." I could barely keep reading. "Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. I tried to come back, twice, but Emily, she wouldn't let me through the door. Said you'd moved on. Said I'd only bring pain." My hands began to tremble. My heart, already cracked, splintered further. Emily, my daughter, 16 then, fiercely loyal, brittle with pride. She'd always tried to protect me, even when the world demanded she grow up too fast. But this? She had kept this from me. The pain wasn't betrayal, not exactly. It was grief. resurrected, a second wave crashing harder than the first. I pressed the letter to my chest. I rocked gently in my chair, letting it all rise. The memories, the ache, the silent what-ifs. The rest of the letter painted a picture I didn't expect. Daniel had remarried briefly. No children. His wife passed from cancer. After that, he moved to Tennessee, worked in a secondhand bookstore, wrote letters he never sent. Until this one. The last line shattered me. If I don't see you again in this life, know that I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped hoping for one more chance. I didn't know exactly why, but I had to find him. Maybe for closure. Maybe to face the ghost I'd carried for decades. Maybe, just maybe, to see if something still burned beneath the ashes. Velma, my nosy but lovable neighbor, noticed the change first. "You've got that fire in your eyes again," she said, flicking ash from her cigarette, leaning over the fence. "You going somewhere?" "Tennessee," I said, folding laundry on the porch. "Maybe for a few days, maybe longer." She raised an eyebrow. "That where the bones are buried?" I managed the smallest smile. "No, but maybe it's where I left a piece of myself." 3 days later, I drove west, alone, for the first time in years, windows down, radio humming low, towns blurred past, places I couldn't pronounce, diners serving coffee strong enough to wake the dead. By the time I reached the address, it was dusk. A small one-story house with peeling blue shutters and a for rent sign. My stomach dropped. Still I knocked. A woman in her 40s answered, gentle eyes, tired smile. When I asked for Daniel Walker, she paused. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "He passed away last spring. Pancreatic cancer. It was fast, barely 3 months." The world tilted. No tears, no scream, just stillness, a silence too loud to describe. Then she asked quietly, "Are you Maggie?" I blinked. Her face warmed. "He talked about you, all the time, said you were the one that got away. He left something for you." Inside, the house smelled of lemon oil and old books. Near the window sat a small wooden box carved with tiny birds. Inside, faded photos of me and Emily. A pressed flower from our wedding. And one final letter. "You were my lighthouse, even when I drifted. I hope you found happiness. I hope you always knew deep down I never stopped loving you. And if there's still a chance, wherever I am, I'll be waiting." I don't remember the drive home, only that the sun was rising as I pulled into the driveway. Charleston looked different, like it had aged with me. Emily was on the porch steps, knees pulled in, makeup streaked. She stood when I got out. Didn't speak. I walked up slowly, the letter still in my coat pocket. "I know," she whispered before I could say a word. "I know you found it. I know what I did." I nodded. "Why, Emily?" "I thought I was protecting you," she said, her voice cracking. "I thought he didn't deserve you. I was wrong. I know that now." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years, I saw her. Not the guarded adult, but the little girl who believed I could fix anything. "I forgave him," I said gently. Tears streamed down her face. "Can you forgive me?" I didn't answer, not yet, because forgiveness isn't a lightning bolt. It's a slow rain, a steady rhythm. It takes time. She needed to feel it, earn it, carry it. But this was the beginning. It started with paint, not wallpaper, not renovations, just paint, white, soft yellow, lavender in the bedrooms, colors of healing, of hope. Emily rolled the first coat herself. Sleeves pushed up, designer nails chipped. She didn't even notice. She was trying, and sometimes that's enough to start again. She didn't return to the mansion as its new owner, but as someone quietly reclaiming the meaning of home. Once a symbol of polished perfection and buried pain, the house began to breathe again. The heavy curtains were pulled down. The cold, opulent chandeliers were replaced with warm Edison bulbs. Even the kitchen tile, Velma chose it. Lord help her taste, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the life returning to these walls. We worked side by side, me, Velma, and a few familiar faces from the old neighborhood who hadn't seen Emily since she wore braces. They didn't return because of her last name. They came because of what the house was becoming. Not just a home, a haven. We named it Rose Harbor. It was Emily's idea, a transitional residence for older women, forgotten mothers, abandoned wives, discarded souls who had nowhere left to go. Women like me, like Velma, like so many who had quietly been erased by the world. "I want to fix what I broke," Emily whispered one night, her voice cracking as we painted the old porch swing a deep teal. "Not just between us. I want to make space for women like you. Women like us." I didn't answer. I just kept painting. but something inside me shifted, like an old wound finally starting to breathe. 3 months later, the doors of Rose Harbor opened. No red carpets, no photographers, just plastic chairs on the lawn, lemonade, peach cobbler, and a band made up of nervous high school kids. I wore the same navy dress I wore to Emily's graduation. It still fit. And then Emily stepped onto the porch and addressed the crowd. "My mother built a life from nothing," she began, her voice trembling. "When I turned my back on her, all she asked for was a place to sleep. I was selfish, I was cruel, and she gave me a gift I didn't deserve. But today, I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm asking for a second chance." Silent, then a single clap, then more, until the lawn erupted in applause. I sat in my chair, tears quietly rolling down my cheeks, dabbing at my face with a napkin that still smelled faintly of barbecue. Later, under a sky scattered with stars, Emily brought me a glass of iced tea and sat beside me. She leaned her head on my shoulder, just like she did when she was little. "You were right," she said. "A house doesn't make a home." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the deed. Worn, folded, already signed over to her name months ago. "I gave this to you," I said, "but now I want you to understand what it truly means." She stared at it, speechless. "You get the house," I said, "but Rose Harbor stays. The women stay. The mission stays." Tears slid silently down her cheeks. "I won't let you down again." I squeezed her hand. "Then we'll be just fine." A week later, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a photograph. Me and Daniel, from a summer picnic when Emily was just 3. We were smiling like the world disappeared around us. On the back, in slanted handwriting, "You made it home." I froze. Maybe it came from one of his old coworkers. Maybe from God. Maybe just the wind carrying things back to where they belonged. But that house, it's never quiet now. Laughter dances through the halls. Stories are told on rocking chairs. Women twirl in the kitchen under midnight lights. There are scars here. But there's healing too. And grace. Emily still has her fire. She still gets frustrated. But now she laughs more, hugs tighter. And when she introduces me to the new residents, she says, "This is my mother, Margaret. She's the reason all of this exists." I smile because I am. I wasn't a perfect mother, but I was her mother. And in the end, that was enough to build something that mattered, something real, something that saved us both. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I wasn't ready to be back yet. Because healing, true healing, isn't about pretending everything's fixed. Sometimes it's about staring at the broken pieces long enough to understand why they broke at all. That's why, 6 days after Emily's confession, I returned to the place I'd buried long ago. Oakwood Terrace. I hadn't driven those cracked streets in nearly a decade. Fences sagged, mailboxes rusted. But the tree in front of our old home, the one Emily used to climb, was tall now, strong, blooming with white blossoms like little explosions of hope. And then I saw her, Mrs. Loretta Mason. She still lived across the street, elegant as ever, wide-brimmed hat, mug of tea. Time hadn't dared to touch her. "Maggie Walker," she called out. "Is that really you?" I laughed through the lump in my throat and crossed the street. We talked for hours about the old days, the things we lost, the things we never dared say. And then, out of nowhere, she looked me dead in the eyes and said something that stopped my heart cold. I didn't open it right away because some truths require a steady hand, and mine was still trembling. For 2 days, the journal sat untouched on my nightstand like it was holding its breath too. I watched it the way you watch a storm roll in, with awe, fear, and a quiet understanding that whatever happens next, the sky won't look the same. On the third morning, before the sun had risen, and while the house was still wrapped in quiet, I made coffee and sat by the window. The fog was thick across the marsh, and the porch light cast long, lonely shadows. I opened the journal. His handwriting hadn't changed. Still bold, still slightly slanted to the left, like he was always running out of time. The first few pages were filled with memories of me, of Emily, of the house on Oakwood Terrace. He wrote about the night he left, about the way he drove past the diner a dozen times, too ashamed to stop. He'd thought he was giving us a better life by leaving, freeing us from his failures. But watching Emily grow up through scattered glimpses and secondhand news had broken something in him. And then there was the page that stopped me cold. "I knocked on your door once, years ago. She answered. She said you didn't live there anymore. I think she was protecting herself, or maybe protecting you. Either way, I never tried again. I figured you were better off without me. Tears spilled freely then, not from pain, but from the tragic understanding of how silence had rewritten our entire story. We hadn't been abandoned. We'd been misplaced, misheard, misaligned. At the very back of the journal, tucked into the flap, was a photograph. It was yellowed and curled at the edges. The three of us, me, Daniel, Emily, sitting in the yard on a rusted lawn chair, dandelions all around. Emily was laughing. I was mid-sentence. And Daniel was looking at us like we were his whole world. I placed the photo on the mantel in Rose Harbor's entryway, right next to the house rules, where every woman who walked through our doors would see it. I wanted them to know this place wasn't built out of perfection. It was built out of cracks, mended things, second chances, out of women who got up when the world told them to lie down. And that's the truth I finally understood. Some doors close so others can be opened. And sometimes the hardest thing in the world isn't forgiving someone else. It's forgiving yourself for the time it took to heal. I waited until nightfall, when the house had finally hushed. The tea had steeped just right, and the lights had dimmed into a warm, forgiving glow. Emily sat across from me on the floor, cross-legged, silent, waiting. Together, we turned each page of the old journal, his words echoing through the years like whispers down a hallway long closed off. His regrets, his moments of joy, his slow unraveling, his desperate attempts to come back. The letters he'd written but never sent. The night he stood in the shadows outside Emily's high school graduation, close enough to see her smile, too far to be part of it. He had watched from a distance, but he had never stopped watching. And at the very end, he had written, "If this journal ever finds its way to you, it means I finally got something right. Tell Emily I never stopped loving her. Tell her I forgave her. Tell her I understand." Emily pressed her forehead to the pages and wept, not like a child, not like a woman undone, but like someone who had finally been released. We buried the journal the next morning, beneath the magnolia tree out back, next to a soft blue bench we'd painted together. We didn't mark the spot. We didn't have to. The memory would live in the roots. Time passed, and then they came. Women, one by one, each carrying more than suitcases, each one bearing invisible weight, heartbreak, abandonment, fear, shame. And every time one of them said, "I didn't think anyone would take me in," I felt something in my chest stretch wider. Emily became their advocate. I became their storyteller. And somehow, in the process, we became something neither of us had ever been before. Whole. One night on the porch swing, her feet tucked beneath a blanket, my hand resting lightly over hers, Emily turned to me and asked, "Do you think he knows what we've built?" The house behind us glowed softly, warm light spilling from windows. From somewhere upstairs, laughter floated down. A soft jazz tune played in the parlor. I looked into the distance and said, "I think he does, because sometimes redemption doesn't roar. It arrives quietly, like a woman walking through a strange front door with trembling hands and finding a freshly made bed, a note on the pillow that reads, 'You are home.' We didn't save them. We saved each other, not by forgetting, but by choosing to rise from what tried to bury us. And I've learned something. The most beautiful things, they don't always match anyone's aesthetic. They simply belong, like truth, like grace, like coming home after the longest journey of your life." 3 months after Rose Harbor opened its doors, word had spread far beyond Charleston. The local news ran a story calling it a Southern sanctuary for the forgotten. Donations poured in: furniture, books, fresh linens. One man dropped off 5 brand new mattresses, tears in his eyes, whispering, "My mama died alone. I wish she'd had this." But what made Rose Harbor sacred wasn't the porch swing or the lavender curtains Emily sewed by hand. It was them, the women, the ones who'd been told they were too loud, too complicated, too much. Women abandoned by husbands, children, even time itself. They came with stories, suitcases packed with pain and defiance. There was Ruth, 82, former jazz singer, 2 strokes, no family left but a nephew who hadn't called in years. She rolled up to our gate in a wheelchair, wearing a single bag and a bottle of cheap perfume tucked in the side pocket. "I heard you take women like me," she said. "I don't have much, but I can still hum a tune." We took her in that very night. Ruth became the heartbeat of Rose Harbor. She sang at breakfast, told wild stories of smoky clubs and jazz nights, her voice carrying traces of laughter and longing. The women would gather around her, mesmerized. She reminded us, joy isn't just survival, it's singing. Emily adored her. Every Thursday night, she brushed Ruth's hair, listening to the same stories over and over. Never interrupting, never rushing, just being there. And sometimes when I watched them from the hallway, I saw the daughter I always hoped Emily would become. But not every moment was gentle. One night, Ruth collapsed in the hallway. Her breath came shallow, her eyes distant. Emily froze. I didn't. I knelt beside her, called for help, and held her hand until the paramedics came. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, Ruth locked eyes with me and whispered, "Don't let me go in silence." That night, Emily and I didn't sleep. We sat in the kitchen, just like when she was a child afraid of the dark. 2 mugs, no sips, just steam rising in the silence. "She's dying," Emily whispered. "She's living," I corrected. "And until her final breath, we make sure she knows she matters." Tears filled her eyes. "I froze," she said. "She looked like you." And suddenly I understood. It wasn't just about Ruth, or the house, or Daniel. It was about fear, the fear Emily had carried for decades. Fear of losing me. Fear of being left with nothing but guilt. That fear had once hardened her, but now it was making her brave. Ruth made it through that night, and the next. She returned 5 days later with an oxygen tank and a playlist of Ella Fitzgerald we played every afternoon. She was quieter, but she was still Ruth. On her final morning, she had one request: let me go out singing. So we wrapped her in a blue velvet robe, sat her on the porch swing. The sun was just beginning to rise. She opened her mouth and sang the first few notes of Misty. Soft, shaky, but unmistakably hers. By the last line, she was gone. Emily held her hand the entire time. We buried her ashes beneath the rose bush we'd planted in her honor. The women each placed a flower on the soil. Emily read a poem she'd written by hand, and I knew in that moment we weren't just giving them shelter, we were giving them a new chapter. And not just for Ruth, but for every woman who was ever told she was too much or not enough. That night, Emily crawled into bed with me, just like she had when she was 5. No words, just silent tears, and that aching kind of love that has nowhere else to go. I held her until she drifted into sleep. The next morning, I found her in the sunroom, coffee in hand, eyes lost in thought. "I want to write about this place," she said quietly. "The stories, the women, all of it." I smiled. "Then start with your own." She looked at me, hesitant. "You think anyone would want to hear it?" I leaned in, kissed her forehead, and said, "Emily Walker, your story built this house." And I meant it, because in the end, it wasn't revenge that healed me. Not the house, not even the letter. It was her, choosing to become a woman who didn't just say sorry, but changed. And through that change, she gave me something no one else ever had. Not just a second chance, but the life I should have had all along. A week after Ruth's funeral, I sat alone in the sunroom, sorting through donation boxes, crocheted blankets, gently used robes, a handwritten note from a church group in Savannah. Every stitch made with love. I held one of the blankets to my chest. It smelled like lavender and memory. 4 months. 4 months since I bought this house. 4 months since Emily accused me of ruining her aesthetic. 4 months since my world turned upside down and somehow settled exactly where it needed to. But peace doesn't come with trumpets or fireworks. It comes in the quiet, in moments you never expect, like when Velma barged in, waving a newspaper like it was a lottery ticket. Guess who made front page again, sugar? She slapped the Charleston Gazette down on the table. There we were, me, Emily, and the women of Rose Harbor, arms around each other on the porch, grinning like fools. From rejection to redemption, the home changing lives in Charleston. I stared at the photo for a long time, not because I liked how I looked. I still didn't, but because I barely recognized the woman in the picture. It wasn't the hair or the clothes. It was the light in her eyes. She looked happy. That afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Not a delivery, not a social worker, just a boy, maybe 16, thin, nervous, holding an envelope like it might bite him. "You Margaret?" he asked. I nodded. He handed me the envelope, then ran down the steps before I could ask a single question. Inside, a letter, not typed, written by hand. Careful script. "Mrs. Walker, you don't know me, but I knew your husband. Daniel worked with my mom at the bookstore. He used to talk about you a lot. said you were the strongest woman he ever met. He gave me this letter months before he died, told me to deliver it when the time felt right. I didn't understand what he meant until I saw the article about Rose Harbor. Now I do. I hope this gives you peace. My knees buckled as I sat down, hands shaking. Daniel's handwriting, sloppier now, weak, but still his. Maggie, if you're reading this, someone braver than me brought it to you. I wish I could be there. Hold your hand, say these words out loud. But life rarely gives us the endings we want, only the ones we make. I know what I did, I know what I left behind, and I know I didn't deserve your forgiveness. But you loved me anyway. I see that now, in this house, in what you're building. You turned rejection into refuge, pain into purpose. You turned our unfinished story into something beautiful. I'm sorry I couldn't stay, but maybe in some strange way you've brought us all home. Always yours, D. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried, but not the kind of tears that break you, the kind that release you. That night, I called Emily outside. The moon was high, the air thick with the scent of gardenias. I handed her the letter. She read in silence, hand over her mouth, breath catching on every word. When she finished, she leaned her head on my shoulder, just like she used to. I wish I'd known him better, she whispered. You still can, I said softly. Through this, through us, we stayed like that until the stars faded into morning. That's when I knew we'd made it through. Not by erasing the past, not by pretending it didn't hurt, but by carrying it with grace, with grit, and with the unshakable belief that it's never too late to build something good from what's been broken. Rose Harbor still stands. Women still arrive, bags in hand, eyes wide with fear and hope. Every time I meet them at the door with a smile. Welcome home, I say, because here's what I've learned. Redemption doesn't knock. Sometimes you have to build the house yourself and leave the door open. It was a Wednesday when the last box was unpacked in the library. A room we once thought we'd never fill, now overflowing. Donated books, mismatched chairs, a grandfather clock ticking just a little offbeat, and sunlight pouring through the windows like grace itself. I ran my fingers along the spines. Romance novels, self-help cookbooks, a first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird, someone's name scribbled inside. Gloria, I smiled, because stories survive us. Emily came in, holding a mug of chamomile and a folder. Her face flushed, not from makeup, but from meaning. She handed me the folder. Inside the final approval papers. Rose Harbor Inc., certified transitional living nonprofit. We built it from brokenness, from forgiveness, from love, and we left the door open. She didn't return to that grand mansion as an owner. She came back as someone learning, perhaps for the first time, what it meant to belong. The house, once sterile and perfect like a museum of old regrets, began to pulse with life again. Velvet curtains fell. Chandeliers that had blinded rather than lit were replaced with warm Edison bulbs. Even Velma, with her questionable taste, picked the kitchen tile. I let her. Lord help me. We worked day and night, me, Velma, a few old neighbors who hadn't seen Emily since her braces days. They didn't come for her last name. They came because something was stirring in those walls. Not just a home, a haven. We named it Rose Harbor, a sanctuary for women abandoned by family, discarded by partners, or simply forgotten by time. Women like me, like Velma, like hundreds who once had nowhere to go when the world told them their stories were over. But Emily, my daughter, had different plans. I want to fix what I broke, she told me one night as we painted the porch swing a deep teal. Not just between us. I want to build something for women like you. Like us. I said nothing, just kept painting. But the knot in my chest slowly began to unravel. 3 months later, we opened the doors. On the front lawn, we hosted a modest gathering. Plastic chairs, lemonade, peach cobbler, a band of awkward but talented high school kids. I wore the same navy dress I'd worn to Emily's graduation. It still fit. As she stepped onto the porch, her hands shook, but her voice didn't. My mother built me a life when she had nothing, she began. And when she needed me, I turned away. I was selfish, I was cruel, and she didn't repay me with bitterness. She gave me a second chance. Silence, then applause, then tears, mine most of all, quietly dabbing at my eyes with a barbecue-scented napkin. That evening, as the stars blinked overhead, Emily handed me a glass of iced tea and rested her head on my shoulder, just like she used to when she was little. You were right, she whispered. A house doesn't make a home. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the deed, worn, folded, already signed over to her. I already gave this to you, I said. But now I want you to understand what it truly means. You get the house, but Rose Harbor stays. The women stay. The mission stays. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I won't let you down again. And for the first time in years, I believed her. A week later, a letter arrived. No return address. Just a photo. Me and Daniel, Emily's father, smiling from a picnic decades ago. On the back, 6 words in slanted handwriting. You made it home. I knew. I don't know who sent it. A former coworker? God? Or maybe the wind itself, carrying forgotten things where they need to go. But I do know this. The house is never quiet anymore. Laughter echoes down the halls. Stories are shared in creaking porch chairs. Women dance barefoot in the kitchen at midnight. There are scars here, but also healing and grace. Emily still bristles sometimes. She hasn't lost that sharpness. But her hugs last longer now. And when she introduces me, she says, "This is my mother, Margaret. She's the reason all of this exists." And I smile, because I am. I was never perfect, but I was her mother. And that was enough to build something that mattered. 6 days passed since Emily's tearful confession on the porch. 6 days since she said the words I waited 30 years to hear, "I want you back." But healing isn't just about stitching wounds. Sometimes you have to return to where they started. So I drove back to Oakwood Terrace, the place where we lost and loved, where hope was planted and later buried. The house where I'd raised Emily stood like a skeleton of our past, worn and sagging. But the old tree she used to climb, it stood strong, blooming with white blossoms like flickers of defiance. And across the street sat Mrs. Loretta Mason, sipping tea like time couldn't touch her. "Maggie Walker, is that you?" We talked for hours, and then out of nowhere she said something that froze me. "You know, Daniel never stopped asking about you. Even when you left, he never let go." And suddenly, the grief I thought I'd buried rushed back with breathless force. The next day, Emily and I were hanging photos of the women who had come through Rose Harbor, each one framed, honored, seen. Velma arrived with lemon bars and sarcasm. "Y'all gonna cry every time someone hangs a photo?" "Probably," I smiled. "Good, means your hearts still work." Later, I stood in front of my mirror, not fixing hair or makeup, just looking. And for the first time in decades, I didn't see the woman left behind. I saw someone whole. That's when I remembered a list I'd once written in an old journal, titled, "When I Have a Home Again." I found it, tucked between forgotten books, a porch swing that creaks, a kitchen full of noise, laughter in the halls, music at night, peace in my bones, a daughter who sees me. Every box checked. Then Emily appeared at the door, eyes glistening. "I found something today." She handed me a sealed envelope, postmarked Tennessee, no return address. Inside, another photo. Me, Daniel, little Emily laughing on his shoulders. On the back, a single line. "She turned out just fine." No name, no explanation, just the universe whispering one last blessing. And I smiled, not because it made sense, but because it didn't have to. That night, we lit candles, not for the dead, but for the living, for the women still searching, still healing, still hoping. And as music floated from the kitchen and hands held hands beneath patchwork throws, I thought, this is the ending I never expected, but it's the one I earned. Not through perfection, through truth, through resilience, through love that refused to disappear. Emily turned to me, "Mama, you built this." I shook my head. "We built this together, and that's how you reclaim a life, one broken piece at a time." As we sat around the table, passing bowls of mashed potatoes and cornbread, someone asked, "What do you even call this place, really? A shelter? A home?" I smiled, glanced at Emily, and let her answer. "This," she said, "is hope with a front porch." The room fell quiet, not out of awkwardness, but because it was true. Rose Harbor wasn't just a house. It was the beginning of 100 second chances. Mine, Emily's, Ruth Daniels, and maybe yours too. So if you're reading this or listening or sitting in your own silence wondering if anyone will ever open a door for you again, I want you to know something. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be polished. You don't need to match the aesthetic. You just need to keep going. Because somewhere out there, a door is waiting to open. And someone is already on the other side, whispering the words that saved my life. Welcome home. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if this story touched you, share yours in the comments. Your voice matters, always.